Welcome to the Bad Tutors podcast. If you're here for the newest, up-to-date, accurate information on the nerdy topics that are near and dear to your heart, well, let me tell you, you ended up in the wrong place. Here we are all about hot takes and grandiose displays of misinformation. So stick along for the ride and you might just blow a blood vessel or two. So a quick disclaimer about this episode. Today we'll be discussing Malifaux, a war game that I have recently grown very interested in. And I'm going to be giving a brief introduction to the world of Malifaux. Now, I've been only reading through the first edition books and did a quick check into the most current third edition to see what kind of differences there might be and how much new things have been added. And it turns out it's a fucking lot. So we're going to be learning about this as I learn about it, going from first edition forward to the better part of things, probably with a little bit of the crazy goddamn third edition lore that I have found very interesting thrown into it.
Alright, so just to clarify, third edition builds on first edition. Correct?
Yes, to my knowledge it does. Things seem to be keeping consistent, but there is just so much more of it. They seem to dive into a lot of real world lore. That's not how that word works. Real world lore isn't lore, it's history. We call it history, don't we?
Yeah. What you're saying is they ground the lore of their world in the history that is reality.
Yes, thank you. That is what I'm looking for. So, just for a quick background on what Malifaux is in general, not as the world, but as a game that exists in our real world. So, what it actually is a story-driven, squad-based skirmish game. So where your 40Ks are going to be fielding 80 to 100 models, you'll get maybe 8 to 10 in a game of Malifaux. And it's set in a steampunk version of the Wild West, which just gives me an absolute throbbing boner. As you know, I am in love with steampunk. Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Wild West. Those stories have a certain captivating mythology about them. And the heroes of them, so.
And from what I've seen, Malifaux really kind of keeps true to that. It keeps a very Wild West feel to things, even though it's very rooted in magic and just a lot of other crazy shit. Right. So it holds true to like the general play style of a war game, where you have your roles and they drive attacks, movements, things like that. Except because it's themed in the Wild West, you actually use a fate deck, right, which is a deck of cards that the numbers dictate your rolls, and you always have a hand of cards, so you can be an old-timey gambler and cheat in a card, kind of fix a roll or two, and make fate work for you. Fate doesn't decide itself, you decide fate. And that's the big difference for Malifaux compared to other war games. So, let's dive into the world. Malifaux takes place in both the natural world that we know as Earth and an altered plane of reality, and it can be found through the breaches in reality is how they're defined. They're kind of just a tear in space-time that open the plane into another world that we now know as Malifaux.
Okay, pretty standard stuff for a fantasy setting.
Exactly. So we're taking place in roughly the 17 to 1800s, like late 1700s, and then moving onwards. That's where this story, the beginning of the world, takes place. Now, like I said, very Wild West, ambiance, gambling, you're killing, deception everywhere. Standard Wild West stuff. Now, where it starts to deviate is both that it has magic and where the magic comes from. So, on Earth, there is magic in this world. There are magic users. That is standard. It might not be the most common thing, but it's accepted. That's used to heal people. It's used to drive business, things like that. Sure. And on Earth, magic is running low. And people are getting pretty concerned about that, because that means that healers are no longer going to be able to perform their normal duties. And that kind of fucks up the flow of natural human society if they haven't been developing medicine, possibly because magic is taking care of it. Why would they have ever bothered? Yeah, so if
if somebody is dying from like tuberculosis, they don't need to have an inoculation plan for that. If you can just go to someone and say, "Hey, I've got TB," and they just rub their hands together, touch your chest, and no more TB.
Exactly.
Why would you need medicine when there's powerful people like that?
Exactly. It just wouldn't make any sense. So, how magic ends up existing in this world, to jump ahead a little bit, but just to give kind of a full description of how Malifaux functions before really diving into the history of this story, is through the use of soul stones. Now, I say soul stones, and you might think, oh, kind of like Skyrim? Well, I have a surprise for you. It's fucking exactly like Skyrim. It's literally the exact same thing. Yeah.
That's surprise. Okay.
Yeah, not surprising at all. They are just simply a magical battery that, when depleted, it has no more magic in it, and it can be recharged through the death of another person.
Okay.
So, as you can imagine, in a Wild West setting, some pretty fucking deplorable shit happens to refill these soul stones once they're discovered. So, let's dive into it. The year is 1787, and the magic of Earth is waning. Magical practitioners are able to perform great feats less and less. Debates break out over whether this is kind of like turning back to nature, is some see magic as unnatural and that we shouldn't be harnessing it. It's something that shouldn't be tampered with. And the other side arguing, of course, that, well, if magic is here, it has to be natural. Where else would it have come from? So a lot of the greatest mages and sorcerers of the time all band together to research and figure out a solution to this problem, right? So they find, through some means, there's a plane of reality very close to ours that may be able to be broken into. And they don't know what it is, but there's some great source of magic coming out of it. So they're hoping that they can get in there and harness it. Where this happens is Breachtown, or what will be called Breachtown, I assume. All of them gather, and they work to rip a tear in reality into this other world. Now, they are successfully able to do so at great cost to themselves. Hundreds of mages lose their lives in the opening of this portal. Most of the town is completely leveled. People are just disintegrated from the sheer energy pouring out of this breach. It is described in the book as, between the two, a featureless, lightless void. So it's just kind of this pale tear in existence that one could step into. And when they first journey in, they find an absolutely incredible city. Different types of architecture scattered everywhere, like intermixed with itself. Greek columns on the bottom half of a building, Gothic arches sitting on the top. It just looks insane to anything we've ever seen. And even though it looks like there were possibly some like remnants of a battle or war, there are no bodies. There's nothing there except for the city itself. So they begin wandering around, led by a Professor Mondragon of the Voynich Institute. I'm sure I'm saying both of those wrong, but it's what I got. And they're walking around, and they notice that there's a lot of different signs around, and a lot of them make sense to them. You got your tailors, your blacksmiths, just like a general goods shop, but they keep looking, and they wonder to themselves, what is a death surgeon? What is a mechanical mage doing? I have no idea what this is. But they're able to kind of secure the city to an extent, just enough to not, immediately die. And finding no written traces of any like business or customs of inhabitants other than like runes on walls that could be art, could be runes, who really knows? They don't find anything. So someone created this magnificent city and completely abandoned it with no clear indication as to why. So eventually they start going out and exploring outside of the city. They found what they can or found what they think they need to, and they go out further, see what this world really has to hold. They didn't find their source of magic. That's what they're here for. And they go out and they find a small mining town, again, completely devoid of life, in a very ramshackle state, just your standard mining town. They go into this mine and find something far more precious than any gemstone that can be found on Earth. They are these gems of varying different colors, sizes, and just beaming with energy. And even though maybe not all of them are trained mages or anything like that, they can feel the raw energy, the magical power of these rocks just in front of them. And they know this is what they were looking for. So when they return, they're going through old manuscripts, old tomes, and people find references to something that they call ether, which is what they assume that this is. And Malifaux is, even then, with people going through, a pretty dangerous city to live in. It's pretty frontier style, martial law type of thing. So it's pretty quickly discovered that if you kill someone around a soul stone and it's empty, it will refill and be replenished with magical energy.
Okay, just to clarify, Malifaux is the city they found as soon as they entered the breach.
It is. It's also how the world is referred to, but it is the city as well, okay, to my understanding. So, yes.
New York City, New York, Malifaux.
I do believe so. Yes. I'd say I will. Let me pull up the map. But yes, I do believe that is true.
So from Breachtown, the city that would be grounded in what we call our reality.
Sorry, it is So much like New York, it is Malifaux City, Malifaux. Yes, 100%. That is what it is like. Breachtown is the side of the Great Boundary on Earth. Okay. Malifaux City is the side of the Great Boundary in Malifaux. After the breach had opened for about 6-8 months, it was not open to the public until finally they decided that people could start coming in. It seemed to be safe enough. There seemed to be not a terrible amount of bad things going on, so people could come in, start trying to mine the soul stones, and start really bringing in some profit. And this was almost, to me at least, equivalent to kind of like a new gold rush, where people could come out if they were willing to brave this complete, not even a new world, in like the sense that we think of the new world, like America is the new world. This is literally a different plane of reality. You're walking through a ripping space-time into a completely new location. But to the downtrodden, the poor, and I mean even people with some money, the opportunity to get even more money or find your fortune is obviously pretty appealing to people, especially in something that is literally this key to civilization surviving. So by that point, life really started growing. People were flooding in. They were filling up mining towns. They were filling up Malifaux City itself, and things were really kind of starting to prosper. And of course, this created a very large abundance of wealth for those that could gather and stay in control of the soul stones. But the issues began to arise when a lot of people started venturing out further and further from the city, looking for new places to mine, or just generally exploring and seeing what they could find. Malifaux City was littered with these old, ancient, like rusted artifacts and machines. And it turned out that when you put a soul stone into them, a lot of them reactivate. Now this could be a little wind-up children, or I guess not wind-up, but a little children's toy, or a fully functioning drill up to like weapons of mass war. Like it could be a lot of stuff, so who knows what really would be found out there in the rest of the world. And they started finding these tombs, and a lot of crews went out and ventured into these tombs, but not a lot of them ended up coming all that frequently. It turns out that when people were going in, it was awakening kind of these old spirits that had been probably long dormant and for God, who knows how long, but they were killing people. But the few people that did return, they, on average, weren't taken very seriously. Like, the cartographers of the times would put little notes in their unknown regions of the map, kind of like a "here be dragons" type of thing, but they called it the Neverborn, almost in a mockery of these people. But as the attacks grew more and more frequent and more vicious, a lot of the skepticism and mockery ended up turning to fear as people learned that clearly these are very real and not to be trifled with. Most people would start completely avoiding these tombs, just not thinking it was worth the risk of losing your life as well as the lives of anyone that you go in there with.
Interesting that there was so much skepticism about these tombs from a place where magic is very much real. You'd think that logically this wouldn't be too much of a leap or bound to get to the point where there's angry spirits. But when there's money to be gained, you don't want to hear that gold has the chance to permeate your skin and poison you. You don't want that being true. Much the same, you don't want to hear that these ancient tombs with tons of soul stones and whatnot in them also have angry spirits. You don't want that to be true.
No.
Bad for business.
You would never believe that. That's a terrible...
Absurd.
That's a PR nightmare. Honestly, rebounding from that would just be nearly impossible, in my opinion. And this led to a certain group of people going in anyways. And some of them were even able to harness the power of these spirits that are returning and learning the art of necromancy and being able to bring back the dead as almost slaves to do whatever they want and work for them and run a mine, go kill some people, whatever you want. Necromancy's necromancy. What are you going to do? Arrest a dead man? You can't. Well, it wouldn't do much.
I love a good necromancer.
I am well aware, yes.
Curious though, in this situation, Wild Wild West style stories and setting, how did they sort of view the necromancers? Because I find that interesting.
So they were definitely outcasts.
Okay.
In this time. A little further on, once one of the main factions comes around, it was for sure completely outlawed and viewed as just one of the most immoral things you can imagine. It is treated as it should be.
Okay, so even though it's Wild West, they do still have a moral compass. If good is north on that compass, necromancy's south.
Yes,
gotcha.
That is certainly true. This may not be the most happy-go-lucky of settings, but it's not quite that bad.
Okay.
Yeah, there is still good people. Necromancy did not just become, oh my god, free slave labor, let's go.
Okay.
All the necromancy. No, that certainly did not happen at all. Everything was prospering in Malifaux for almost a decade. Things were going well. Soulstones were flowing out. People were getting paid. The rich were getting richer. The powerful were getting even more powerful. Until in the winter of 1797, one of the worst blizzards ever seen in Malifaux had happened upon the city. Now, during this, to make it even worse, to be honest, I'm not sure if the blizzard is tied to why this is happening or not. I don't believe so. I believe it was a blizzard and the event I'm about to describe separately.
Okay.
It turns out that the Great Boundary, the first breach to ever open into Malifaux, was slowly beginning to close. Now, this breach was large enough to fit a steamship through, which how it looks, it's just a very large locomotive.
Okay.
Steam powered, real steampunk tech. At this point in time, it was about like a man could barely make it through. It was about the size of a man, but no one could actually even make it through. There was almost an invisible barrier that would not let them cross. Until one day in Breachtown, the Earth side of the Great Boundary, they heard sounds of just an immense battle, like screaming, just absolute tear everywhere. But they couldn't get through. They had no idea what was happening.
This is Malifaux listening through the tear into Breachtown, or the other way around?
It was very strangely worded in the story. Breachtown listening through to Malifaux.
Malifaux. Yes. Understood.
So, many of the greatest mages that weren't in Malifaux already were in Breachtown, using all of their soulstones, trying to keep this open, trying to make sure that this could continue. Without this, magic would almost surely collapse yet again. And then suddenly, everything went silent. And just before the Great Boundary finally collapsed in on itself and sealed, a mangled corpse was tossed out with a single word carved into his chest, reading, "Ours."
Ominous.
It's a little ominous. It might be a little spooky, I won't lie. We're not exactly sure what did it in first edition yet. I'm sure we figured it out by third. But to me, it's still a mystery.
Okay. I'm a fan of it.
Yeah, it's honestly a really cool world. The more I'm reading into it, I definitely just bought into it because of Gremlins. Because I'm a diehard Goblin fan, day one, in and out. And these are Wild West goblins. Ooh, I'm so sold.
Yeah.
But, so this event was deemed on Earthside is the fall of the Great Boundary. Again, like with Soulstones, super creative with names, these guys.
Mm-hmm.
And the people on Earth really started to expend their Soulstones. When the mages were trying to keep the Great Boundary open, they were expending hundreds of Soulstones, just trying to pour magic into this breach and keep it open. So when it closed, supplies of Soulstones were very short, and this obviously began to lead to a lot of wars and fighting over them, trying to keep those in power. If you can control as much of the Soulstones as possible, you will have the most power. This is what gave rise to our first faction. This is the Guild. This is, to quote the story, a society of ruthless merchants, politicians, and practitioners of the magical arts. These were the first to seize power and gain control over the remaining Soulstone supply. Their headquarters, set up in Breachtown, was made to ensure that they could remain in power. If anything were to happen in the Great Boundary to reopen, they would be the first in. They would reclaim the power lost in Malifaux.
So, if I'm understanding this, we have a guild of magical Rockefellers.
Not all magical, but certainly a lot. Yeah.
So Rockefeller and his house mage.
Yeah. Pretty
Okay.
much. Rockefeller and Merlin are big chillin' in the guild.
Gotcha.
For sure.
Gotcha.
This is a lot of all of your politicians, just anyone. I'm sure a lot of people that just had the soul stones from the ensuing battles. That's who started to make up the guild.
Okay.
So, with these depleting, and the guild in charge of them, they obviously outlawed the use of them unless you are in the guild. You weren't even allowed to possess a soul stone. It was that precious to them.
Okay.
And becoming kind of a ruling class, and all of the magic that kept them in power kind of running out, they did some not so nice things to stay into power. Again, to quote the book, soulstones were replenished at hospitals prisons, madhouses, and even orphanages. Although considered cruel by some outcasts and activists, the guild promoted it as a necessary act of preservation, which, don't get me wrong, can be argued for sure. Like, it was for natural preservation, but I mean, thank you. Definitely, kind of killing a lot of people to power these soul stones, especially when you start getting into children.
Yeah,
the sick.
Sick people already on death's door. I played a necromancer. I've had this argument with you guys in character. They're already on their way out. Let me just speed up the process to get some utility out of them.
Yeah, they let them live some more usefulness.
Pushing it to orphans who have already experienced a great deal of loss and have their entire life ahead of them. Mm-hmm. That's a lot. That's a lot to justify.
Yeah, but when you have the magic, you can kind of justify more or less whatever you want, right?
Yeah.
So that just continued for like 100 years. Because who the fuck was going to stop that? Yeah. There was no one to do anything. When you have control of the soul stones and don't let anyone have them, and there's no more coming into the world, you can get a grip on that pretty fucking quick.
Yeah.
Like, if there were more flowing in, that would be nearly impossible. But without that, who's to stop them? But exactly 100 years to the minute, suddenly, the great boundary ripped open once again. This time causing almost none of the devastation of the first event of opening it. There was still some minor destruction around where it opened itself, but nothing leveling a fucking city. Like, nothing that bad. It just,
I mean, you're undoing the fabric of reality. There's going to be some devastation nearby.
There's going to be some consequences. You can't just expect that to go off out of nowhere.
But we're talking a much smaller scale of devastation here, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Like, it didn't specify. I'd imagine, like, no more than a city block.
Okay.
If anything, if that bad. I don't believe it was even that bad. So, expecting the worst, obviously, the guild readied a heavy armament of men ready to defend Breachtown, expecting whatever attacked the citizens of Malifaux City to come pouring out of the Great Boundary again, ready to kill them all. Now, they found that did not happen. So, they sent in a heavily armed contingent of men into Malifaux City, and they found some ruins. It was still there, on whole, but certainly a lot of things were destroyed. But again, they found no bodies, and it seemed as though the fighting, based on the wreckage and how everything was, it seemed that it would have opened minutes after it had closed, even though it had been nearly a century on the Earth side of things. So that obviously really tripped people up. They were not sure where that was coming from. So finding that the city was barren except for some rubble now, the guild obviously immediately rushed in to reclaim their supply of soul stones. They needed to get this flowing again. And they absolutely did. But they also realized you have to mine these things up. And that's a lot of fucking work. That's a lot of back-breaking, hard labor doing this. We're better than that.
We're going to buy the railroads.
We're going to buy the railroads. We're going to hit the oil fields. We're going to buy the railroads. Literally. If you replace oil with soulstone, that is exactly what they did. They realized they are the ones in charge. they can set this up, they can set the prices, they can regulate it, they will rule this world. So that, again, kind of just continued. They were able to do that. They stabilized Malifaux City yet again. And instead of being immediately open to the public, it did become open to the public, of course, but they set it up a little bit more so, say you're going to be in prison for the rest of your life. Want to come to Malifaux? How about you come work for us? You're not going to be in prison, but you're going to be working for us. So there were a lot of second chances, we'll call it, for people. You can sit and rot in prison for the rest of your life, or fuck it, try your luck over here, see what happens. Maybe we'll let you go and you'll be rich one day. Now, of course, there were also volunteers to do this, to come over and work, of course, and the wealthy were obviously bringing their entire families over. Like, again, similar to I suppose you would say, a more controlled gold rush at this point, or a gold rush with an overseer. Yeah. Not letting you take your own things, but you could still come here. Obviously, any magical practitioner is going to hop over. Why wouldn't they? Especially if you're part of the guild, or even if you're not, you'd still be able to go over and then start practicing magic again. It won't be locked down incredibly tightly like it was before. As I said as well, like, you're restarting the city. You need your craftsmen, you need your guildsmen.
Skilled trade.
Not guildsmen, but guildsmen. Everything with that, and of course the guild was keeping control of all of this. So when you can regulate it, you can tell people who can come over, who can't come over, and it turns out that maybe if you were an enemy of the guild, you didn't die, you just woke up on a train in Malifaux with like a bruise on your head. And oops, you're in a forced labor camp now. But, much to the guild's dismay, other breaches started opening up throughout Earth. Now, they tried to control these, obviously, as much as they could. But, not when more and more keep opening, that obviously becomes more and more difficult. You can't maintain every breach. People are going to get through. So this kind of led to a lot more of the Wild West feel that we might describe. This was really your frontier. After you're out of Malifaux City proper, once you get out of guild territory, it's lawless. A lot of people got out of Malifaux City specifically to avoid the guild. And they set up towns, they set up little villages, and they did all right as well, of course, with whoever's in charge controlling the most soul stones. And people kind of started to figure out, even if we're out here not following the guild's laws, as long as some money goes their way, you give them some soul stones, they don't really care. As long as they're getting what they want, as long as the soul stones are flowing back Earthside, whatever happens out here doesn't really fucking matter. So there's your Wild West element to this a little bit more so. Instead of Magic Vegas, you got your Western towns.
Okay, so we have the guild being your criminal syndicate controlling the wealth, primarily. New rifts open up under these same strange circumstances that the Great Boundary reopened, and people start to challenge that. But they also kick the guild some cash so that they don't come, so that the guild doesn't come and like kick their teeth in and take all of their shit.
Exactly.
All right, making sense so far.
Yeah, great guys. And obviously, as this is happening, they in Malifaux, in like where they have control, they are cracking down. You don't go against the guild. It's Iron Fist, we are in control. Now, Malifaux City is the closest thing you're going to get to a bastion of civilization and, like, I'll call standard life in Malifaux. But after the Great Boundary reopened, there are now large swaths of the city that are completely uninhabited, or at least uninhabited by civilized folk. Outcasts of society might go there if they absolutely have to, but this is like to the point where the guild is building walls and bulwarks to stop people not only from going there, but to stop the things on the other side from coming in.
Okay, so we have the formation of ghettos.
No, not like that. This is the Neverborn coming back and attacking.
Okay.
This is becoming a much more real problem in the city. Attacks are becoming more frequent, they're becoming more voracious, and they need some kind of defense.
So all of a sudden in Malifaux City, there is the looming threat of Netherborn attacks.
Yes.
This is towards the outskirts of the city, I imagine.
Yes and no. There are certain areas of it. Again, let me show you this map. Riveting audio content. But there are some areas like that, but I believe there are some kind of in the middle of the city as well. Yeah, so there you got your big quarantine zones.
Okay, so what I'm seeing... Wow.
Yeah, like large swaths, like, what would you say, about 2/3 of this city is basically cordoned off.
Yeah, so to break it down, I would imagine downtown is where we originally open up with the Great Boundary.
That is actually slightly outside of the city. You do have to take a train into it.
Okay,
but,
gotcha.
Yes.
Okay, I see right here in the legend.
Yep.
Should refer to that. So it looks like there's the breach, and then you take a train to Malifaux City proper, as Ian stated. And then we have a couple of slums near downtown. We have an industrial zone, as well as a couple of construction zones. Then we have the largest of the slums, which is the central slums, and that is flanked on either side by a quarantine zone.
Oh yes, there are still ghettos. You were correct in saying there are ghettos,
but
those just weren't the areas
yes,
I happened to be describing.
So these quarantine zones are surrounding the ghettos because the people who are living the hardest life in New Malifaux should also have to worry about attacks from vicious, vengeful spirits.
We would have it no other way.
Exactly. But it does really look like there are just like islands of slums within these like quarantine zones and along the outskirts of the city, which begs the question. Maybe Ian doesn't have the answer to this after his research, but are those people in the slums just fucked and left to their own ability to survive?
I do not have the answer to that.
It seems to be what's implied.
Probably,
it seems to be what's implied
likely, yeah,
by the map.
Based on the map, they don't seem to be in a good way.
Yeah.
This is eventually in first edition. You do have the faction of the outcasts.
Okay.
This could be where the outcasts are in some degree. They could also be out away from the city, depending on your character. Depending on
Sure.
where you are. I'm
Sure.
not exactly sure. But that more or less wraps up the story, The Breach, A History of Malifaux. That is our primer to hop into this world.
Well, I'm not going to say that there was some great surprises of the setting so far. I think with just a little bit of exposure to a fantasy setting, this sort of thing seems very common.
Mm-hmm.
But I do like how they're taking traditional fantasy tropes, tying it with like real world criminal syndicate behaviors. There seems to be a little bit of criticism of capitalism in here.
Capitalism criticism.
We'll stay away from that, but I like the setting that has been built out so far. Playing the game, I see a lot of the setting in the game itself. Of course, we've played 3rd edition, correct?
We have. Yes.
Okay. So some of the characters that we played, they're factions that we have not explored yet. So I am interested in exploring those. But
both of the characters we have played, I do know, are in 1st edition. I've already read. So we have the 2 sets of Rasputina and Somerteeth Jones, the Gremlin.
Right.
The best boy. And these 2 I do know are in it. I have read the first couple stories that follow Rasputina. She is very interesting. I think she's going to be a very good character. A lot of mystery surrounding her so far. Not too much detail, but like, if you've seen the box art and it's like, oh, a pale woman with a long fur coat in this summer heat, and you're like, oh yeah, 100%, no question, that's who it is.
Yeah.
Obviously seen through retrospective, just knowing these things, but it's going to be very interesting, I think. And just to give a very, very brief outline of the factions, more or less just kind of listing what they are and the very little bits that I know about them. So starting off, obviously, we have the Guild, which we've talked about. They're I don't want to say ruling class, but because that's not exactly accurate. They're not like the only power. Once things get more established, there's a massive casino that is incredibly important and very, very powerful in the setting. So there are other powerful entities, but they were the first one. They
so
are
we
the
can
ones that set everything up.
Yeah, they are our establishing group that decided, hey, we could make some profit off of soulstones and exploit the hell out of everyone doing so.
Exactly. Secondly, we have the Neverborn, who were very briefly discussed in this story, but they are the undead. They're demons. They're a lot of the things that go bump in the night, if you will.
Gotcha.
I'd say I don't know a lot of details around them. The models are fucking incredible. So many of them are really cool. This entire game has
great
absolutely
models.
Incredible models, to be totally honest.
With the setting, I'd expect nothing less, and I think they nailed it with the models too. Mm-hmm. You have steampunk, Victorian era fashion.
Yep.
As well as Wild West.
Sexy goblin. Only the one sexy goblin. And I say sexy facetiously because it makes me very uncomfortable. Trixibel Jones.
You have the undead.
To look at. Yeah. So,
you have necromancers.
They, in 1st edition, are part of the Outcast faction.
Okay.
But they later, I'm not sure in 2nd or 3rd edition, turn into the Resurrectionists.
Okay.
So these are necromancers harnessing kind of the Neverborn power. That I believe that's kind of how they learned about it and draw into it. But that's where they end up. Outcasts, I assume.
Yeah.
They're doing outcast shit.
Yeah.
Then you have
fringes of society.
Exactly.
Rejected.
Outlaws, yeah. Whether it's an outlaw or maybe
disenfranchised.
Some necromancers in there that aren't part of the Resurrectionists. I don't know. You have the Arcanists, who are the magic users of Malifaux. That's where like Rasputina falls under. That's a lot of your magical things. Even though everyone's using magic, they're the mages. They're the sorcerers. From what it seems.
I'm sorry. That was the Arcanist.
Yes, the Arcanists.
Okay.
The Bayou is the only faction that matters. That's where the Gremlins are.
Yep.
They are backwoods hicks of goblins that are just batshit insane. I mean, they're basically goblins with guns. to be totally honest. They my favorite model of theirs is the Whiskey Golem, which is a bunch of whiskey casks not tied together, but assembled together into a hulking golem that just fucking smashes people.
You know, I was going to say, when you said goblins with guns that are insane, I was going to say, oh, the state of Kentucky. And you said whiskey. So I was like, oh, the state of Tennessee.
Exactly. So you're on board now.
Jokes. I just visited Tennessee recently. It was lovely. Everybody there was actually the nicest people I've ever met.
Bless your heart.
No, I'm being serious.
Oh,
You walk into a diner and you order a stack of pancakes and you have a conversation with someone about their grandchildren that, you know, were just born or whatever. You don't get that in the Midwest.
You really don't. It's a lot of, hey.
Yeah, you get.
Have a good day, bud.
Yep.
And that's about it. My current, before doing all of my research, favorite character, who I mentioned, I have the box set for, Sommerteeth Jones, lies in the bayou. I'm going to talk about him for just a minute because he's like the only character I actually know about. He was for a while in charge of the Bayou Gremlins before some shit happened, obviously. He got his name when he was wrestling around with a big pig, and he didn't win, and he got a bunch of his teeth knocked out, and they thought he was dead. And he got up and said, oh, and they went, you're missing teeth. And he went, well, some are over here and some are over there. So he became Sommerteeth Jones. Now his son Lenny Jones is actually who is in charge of the bayou, but he's basically just the puppet of his father, who still more or less runs things behind the scenes, while Lenny, a very likable gremlin, loved by all, is the figurehead.
Gotcha. Like how Fidel Castro supposedly died and his younger brother took over, when we all know that Fidel Castro has been kept alive indefinitely with a breathing machine and signs all executive orders into action for Cuba.
Yeah, it's very similar to how Tim Cook is the CEO of Apple. Very similar situations.
Right.
And that leaves the last faction, the Ten Thunders, who, I'll be honest and say that a lot of Eastern mythology and things, I find it interesting, but it's not always my cup of tea.
Yeah.
The Ten Thunders are that. They're the Yakuza.
Yeah, we had that discussion.
Yeah. But they look actually very, very cool. Yeah. From the couple things that I've already read, I think the Ten Thunders are going to be an incredibly fun faction to read about. And they are the real criminal underbelly of Malifaux. So,
Ten Thunders are not just the appeasement to the anime corner of the market. They actually have good writing and stuff like that, from what we can tell.
It would certainly seem that way, yes. I certainly hope it's that way, because God, just catering to anime fans is such a pain.
Well, listen.
I'm not going to say... There's a time and a place. I watch anime from time to time. I don't hate anime, but any just blatant fan appeasement normally pisses me off. If there isn't a reason for it, it's annoying to just throw it in for fan service.
I would also say it normally pisses me off, but if they released, say, a set of cat girls and anime, big titty GFs and waifus, I could get on board.
I mean, I don't want to say where my money's going, but I won't say it's not going there in that case.
All right, well, we're pushing pretty close to the end of the episode here. We're getting off topic, so we're going to wrap up. And next time, we're going to continue with a little bit more Malifaux, maybe getting into some of the 3rd edition sprinkled in along with the 1st edition. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, and this will be episode 1 of many for Malifaux.
Yeah, a lot going into it. So the next episode of Malifaux Lore is coming And we'd also like to talk about Magic the Gathering. We play a lot of that. And, of course, we'd like to get back to some D&D discussion, things we like about certain TTRPGs, things we don't like about some. We did an episode on 5th edition versus Pathfinder. You should check it out if you play either of those. We have awful takes, and we want you to tell us how wrong we are in the comments. Please tell Ian that 5th edition is not so bad. He really demonizes it because we just love the feat selection of Pathfinder.
It's just so much more versatile. It really is. So many choices.
Yeah, so don't be afraid to get in the comments section.
Light us the fuck up.
Light us up. Insult the way that my voice sounds. I have a nasally Midwestern accent. Let me hear about it.
Alright, well that'll be us signing off for today. Thanks for listening to the Bad Tutors podcast.
Until next time, I'm Tyler, and I wear Crocs with socks.
I'm Ian, and I hate them.